Oh, you hear the pops and bangs.
Welcome to Sports and Touring, and today we are starting a two-part series on which is the purest R8. In the first video we're going to focus on manual, R-Tronic or S-Tronic gearboxes, and in the second we're going to look at quattro versus rear wheel drive.
So we've got the 2007 Manual R8 V8, which was actually the press car that was used on Top Gear for their review when they did it back in the day. We've also got the channel's R8 GT Spyder, which is obviously a very special car to us, and also the 2020 R8 rear wheel drive.
We happen to be here working with Jayemm on cars, and the only reason we have access to two of these cars is because, well, we happen to be helping him with a series that he's doing, partly by supplying our car, but also by doing a little bit of driving on his behalf with the permission of Audi to give him the drive-by shots that he needs. So in this first part we're going to be focusing on gearboxes, and behind us we've got the R8 V8, the original granddaddy with the gated manual gearbox.
It has a 4.2 litre V8, which was a relatively common engine for Audi to use at that time. They had it in the RS4 and other models. It has 420 PS, a 0 to 60 time of 4.3 seconds, and a top speed of 187 miles an hour. So it wasn't necessarily the fastest supercar when it came out at the time, but that wasn't really what they were going for when it came to this car.
And some people would argue that it was more of a sports car than a supercar, but I think at the time it kind of just about qualified as a supercar. Since Jayemm on Cars says it and Jeremy Clarkson says it, it must be true. Next up is our R8 GT. If you've joined the channel for the first time, make sure you go back and check out our playlist on our collection video and pretty much everything we've done with it since. I'll leave a link in the description below.
This has the 5.2 litre naturally aspirated V10, essentially the same engine as Lamborghini Gallardo of that generation. It has 560 PS, a top speed of 197 miles an hour, and also a 0 to 60 time of 3.8 seconds. So a whole half a second quicker to 60 miles an hour than the V8. I'm curious to see how that's gonna feel in comparison later on.
This has the R-Tronic gearbox, which on the GT was standard, but on the other R8s was a £5,000 option. Now the R-Tronic, many say, is a bit of a rubbish gearbox, and we're going to put that to the test today. And finally we're going to be looking at the 2020 R8 rear wheel drive. Now this is an S-Tronic gearbox, which is the dual clutch, as opposed to the single clutch R-Tronic, which is in the GT. Now this is going to feel considerably different, and I'm quite excited to see how big a difference it is, because I actually haven't driven one of these yet.
So this has a 0 to 60 time of 3.6 seconds, so ever so slightly faster than the Spyder. However, it's a couple tenths slower than the current Quattro. It's got a 5.2 naturally aspirated V10, same as the GT. However, this is more like the Lamborghini Huracan engine rather than the Gallardo. It's got a top speed of over 200 miles an hour, 540 PS, and seeing as it's all being sent to the rear wheels, I'm expecting it to be a lot of fun.
But will it be more fun? Well, we'll cover that in the second video, but for today we're going to focus just on the gearboxes. So let's jump in the cars and see what they like to drive.
There's a manual and there's a gated manual, and they are not the same thing, I have to say. It just feels completely different. It feels like you have to be a bit more precise. Listen to that sound. I think this is the first gated manual I've ever driven personally, and it is a very, very satisfying click. Now, that's from a driver's point of view, but from a passenger's point of view, is that annoying?
No, I don't mind it at all. It's a bit jerky, but I think that's driver over gearbox. No, I'm joking. It's quite cool.
But the sound, like, is it like...
Well, I love mechanical sounds in cars, so that's something that I personally love. But I can imagine how it could get annoying to certain people.
And I think for the power of the V8, it kind of makes sense. The manual is what you need. Question is, would I want it in the V10? Maybe, we'll see. It depends on the character of the car.
I think it's much more difficult to compare a manual V8 compared to paddle shifts V10 rather than if you were comparing a manual V10 compared to those. So
yeah,
it'd be interesting if maybe one day we could get a manual V10 on the channel to be able to have another comparison to see how that actually feels.
It's not bad. I mean, it's clearly not going to be as fast, but it pulls nicely. So I'm going to have to blip the throttle myself.
One thing I've always noticed when watching videos of people drive manual R8s is it always seems like the shifting's quite slow. When you go to shift, does it feel like there's a bit of restriction to it that feel a bit different?
It does feel very, very different being gated, actually. It's the more satisfying shift. Cheesy was going to cut the corner there.
Yeah. Okay, no, it must have just been the people I was watching then, because...
What, are my gear shifts okay?
Yeah, your gear shifts are fine. Yeah, it's got some kick to it, doesn't it?
Well, I'd say that's given us an insight into driving the manual. It is engaging, as you would expect. It's additionally satisfying having this sort of click, click, click. It's just, it feels great. I'd say let's jump into the GT and see what the R-Tronic gearbox is like before we move on to the S-Tronic.
Yeah, let's do it.
Right, so we're in the GT now. Having come from the manual, this car just feels just completely different, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It feels like a race car compared to the V8. I mean,
Yeah.
just how bumpy it is, how stiff the suspension is.
The seats do such a big factor in that as well.
Yeah, definitely. Of course, everything feels a million times faster just because you've got the wind rushing past you. Hey, we're here to really talk about the R-Tronic. Now, with the R-Tronic, you have to do something interesting. You have to treat it like a manual. So when you go up the gears, you have to actually give it a slight lift. So as you give it some beans, if you leave your foot on the throttle like that, it gives you that horrible shift. It's not nice.
And it's essentially slipping the clutch, isn't it?
It is. So it's not good for your clutch, and it doesn't give you as fast a gear change. So let's just try that again. Much smoother. And I know a lot of people say a lot of bad things about it, but I really like it. It's more involved than your typical DCT. I mean, we still have to get in the rear wheel drive and see. What I like about it is there's a certain amount of skill where I literally have to get the timing right, where I click the paddle and then a fraction of a second later do that little lift and then squeeze the throttle back on as I feel the gear change happening. I feel like I am driving this car even though it's changing the gear for me. I feel I have to do something to get the best out of the car. And I think if you're used to driving a manual like I am and like you are, you want that involvement. However, I'll be honest, in this car with this power, I kind of want that F1, you know, gear shift, that sensation.
Yeah.
So I'm quite glad of having the paddle shift, but also having to have some skill to get the best out of it.
I just love the way, even at slow driving, every time you shift, you can like feel the mechanical, like you can just feel it all happening behind you.
Yeah.
It's like, even when it's slow gears, you just shift up and you just feel something behind you just go clonk. Like, it doesn't make any noise or anything, but you just
feel it.
It's a proper mechanical, and that's what it really should be in a car like this. I mean,
I think so. But of course, this isn't trying to be the same kind of car as the rear-wheel drive. The rear-wheel drive is trying to be an entry-level car. I mean, when this came out, this was the most expensive R8 Audi had ever made.
yeah, true.
You know, this was intended to be a bit of more of an experience. Oh, it just sounds so good. And even the downshifts, they just feel much more... I love it. Right, I think since we've driven this car a lot, and we've spent a lot of time talking about it in the past, I think it's time to move on to the rear-wheel drive, the 2020 rear-wheel drive. What do you think?
Yeah, let's jump into it.
Cool. So we are now in the R8 RWD, or rear-wheel drive, which is the S-Tronic gearbox. It has a double clutch system, which means those gear shifts are absolutely instantaneous and very, very smooth. And there was James out having fun in the GT.
Did you see the guy in the car behind? He was there like...
I didn't see that. So back to the car. Now, one of the things I have to remember is don't lift. So as you would have seen in the GT, I have to do a little lift when I change gear because it's essentially a single clutch manual internals, whereas this is a double clutch system. So this means that the next gear is pre-selected and one clutch disengages as the other one engages. So I can just keep my foot flat and just drive and just choose the gears as I go up and down. Oh yes. Oh, you hear the pops and bangs.
Did I feel the back wiggle a bit there, by the way?
Yes, you did.
Ooh.
Just a little bit. I mean, that change is instant.
These gearboxes actually can shift faster than the human eye can blink.
Yeah.
So that kind of engineering and technology that's gone into it is just crazy to think that it can do that.
This is definitely going to be the faster gearbox. So 0 to 60 times will be faster with this box than the R-Tronic, and then faster again than the manual. But I feel like there's something missing. Like, there's no drama.
Yeah. It is rapid though.
There's no drama. It's rapid. I mean, and the shift is instantaneous.
Yeah.
I'm going to say this, please don't kill me, internet, but I think I prefer the experience of the R-Tronic. I don't mean the result, because this is going to be faster, undoubtedly. But there's no skill in the gear change.
I do understand what you mean. Is that even from a passenger seat in the GT, it's so much more of an experience when you put your foot down and you get kicked in the back of the head by the gear shift, and it's like such a visceral experience.
Yeah.
Whereas in this, when you put your foot down, it is still amazing. Like, the car itself is amazing, don't get me wrong, but from a gearbox standpoint, it just doesn't give you that same drama. I think it'd be interesting to see, because obviously this is the only R8 of the current generation that you've driven. So it'd be interesting to see if maybe on the V10 Plus model, Audi made some changes to the system so it does feel a bit more visceral when you use it. But again, we're gonna have to get one on the channel to see.
Yeah, I think we will.
Yeah. But I do have to say, from the passenger seat perspective, when we're just cruising and rolling like this, it's a much more comfortable experience.
Oh, it's so smooth.
It's so smooth.
This was like a car that I was going to daily, as a daily supercar. This is the gearbox I want, because you can go on a long drive. This is like, you can just munch the motorway miles in this car, go on a driving tour in complete comfort. But if you want that raw, kick in the back experience, it's lacking that. And that's where I think the GT is the car that I prefer from an experience point of view. In conclusion, having driven the manual in the form of the V8 with that beautiful gated gearbox, the GT with the R-Tronic with that thump every time you change gear, and the fact that it requires some skill to actually get a decent gear change, where you have to get the timing of the lift on the throttle and the paddle click perfect. The fact that that requires some skill is kind of like the perfect balance between this and the manual in terms of giving you some engagement but faster shift times, but with the drama. And this is obviously a much better gearbox, but overall, for me personally, just a little less entertaining. But I think it works in a car like this, and I think that the R-Tronic in a car like this would feel annoying. But the R-Tronic in the GT, actually, it suits the car.
Because it's such a raw driving experience, and the way the whole car's been set up, it's not meant to be like this, which is like the daily drivable supercar. That's meant to be more of a thoroughbred, track-focused supercar.
Yeah. So if you've enjoyed our feature on the transmissions, watch out, because next up we're going to be talking about Quattro versus rear-wheel drive.
Also, subscribe to Mr. Jayemm on Cars' channel, because without him we wouldn't have been able to do any of this today.
And if you've enjoyed today, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell icon, choose notifications on all videos so you don't miss the next episode. And we'll see you next time on Sports and Touring.
2020 R8.
Right, the 2020 model. Now this has the R-Tronic.
0 to 60 time of.
And finally we're going to...